Welcome to the Visible Risk Masterclass series on cyber risk quantification. I'm Jack Freund. In this session, we're going to be talking about how to start doing CRQ today. The four things we'll talk about to begin a CRQ program today are making sure that you have a problem area that is sufficient for cyber risk quantification, making sure that we frame the problem in a way that is meaningful and that can be articulated with the data that we have, developing data sets around those problem spaces and making sure that we do the right computation, and then finally, communicating those results to executives to make sure that they understand the risk associated with this particular scenario. There are a number of different areas that can benefit from cyber risk quantification. We'll go through a few of them today. The ones that I think are great places to start include broken things or missing things, or what a lot of organizations call issues or findings. Sometimes these are things that come about as a result of internal audit findings, or your own second or first line assessments of problems and controls within your organization. The other thing that is beneficial is to make use of a control exception process. Sometimes organizations, when they're developing new technology projects, will discover things that they can't put into place or they won't be able to put in place in time. These things are oftentimes called control exceptions and fit very similarly to issues and findings that way. These sort of things are very beneficial to help organizations get quick wins and better understand what cyber risk quantification looks like and how it can be used to better inform decision making. Other areas that are more impactful but less typical include the purchase of a cyber risk insurance policy. In order to determine how much coverage you need, it's oftentimes important to be able to know how much loss you think you might have. Doing some assessments around this can help better inform that decision-making process around the purchase of a policy. It can help you gut check the types of assessments that you'll be getting from your brokers in terms of how much loss they think you might incur and how much insurance you should purchase. Another area of importance is doing an assessment during a merger or an acquisition. M&As like this are very similar to third-party risk assessments in that you're evaluating another company's cybersecurity. So incorporating that company's operations in your own means that you're going to be exposed to the risk that they're going to be exposed to. So understanding the type of loss that they might incur helps you understand better the type of loss that you might incur and can inform the decision makers during the M&A process. Another area that is very impactful is for organizations that are undergoing capital allocation exercises. This can help you better understand the type of loss that you might have so that you can put risk-based capital against it. Building a set of scenarios and articulating that loss in terms of dollars is very helpful for organizations that are looking to understand better what their operational risk loss might look like, especially with respect to cyber risk quantification. Areas that are too advanced for a quick win, but are good to keep in mind for a longer-term CRQ program implementation, are things like overall security program evaluation. This helps you understand if you're putting the right resources to different parts of your cybersecurity operation and your IT team to make sure that you're getting the benefits that you need out of the investments in those areas. Another advanced area is doing board reporting. This takes all the granular things you're assessing at a lower level and then aggregates them up to a much larger number appropriate for board interpretation. Working from the bottom to the top is important for boards because if you want to assess terms of what a data disclosure risk looks like, this gives you the opportunity to say, when I have a data disclosure risk, here's the 10 things I looked at that tell me what I think that looks like. And here's the applications, servers, and databases that can contribute to that. This helps you move up and down the organization in terms of communication is an important part of an overall CRQ program. Finally, organizations want to understand generally what their return on investment is. Are we spending the right amount of money on things, and are we getting the right amount of return for that? Generally speaking, in cybersecurity investments, you don't get a return the way you would a financial investment. What you get instead is loss avoidance. So it's good to better understand if you invest $1 in prevention here, how much less risk are we going to have later? CRQ gives you the tools to be able to articulate that well, and focusing on the scenarios and the aggregated groups helps you better understand if you're spending money in the right areas or do you need to reallocate those funds. Once you've identified the problem area for your CRQ program, it's important to frame that problem area in terms of a scenario and what I like to call a fully qualified risk scenario. Or simply put, it's a natural language expression of what's going wrong, and it follows these 4 steps. The first is you have to understand who is doing something. Who's the protagonist? Typically, this is the threat actor in the scenario that we're evaluating. Second, we want to look at what they're doing. What's the control deficiency, the control weakness, or the missing control that they're exploiting to be able to cause harm to the organization. Thirdly, identify and name the technology assets that's in scope for this. Is it a customer portal? Is it a server? Is it a database? Is it a mobile device? And finally, make sure that you name the particular type of loss that we're talking about. Without loss, there is no risk, so the impact statement has to reflect the type of loss that the organization is going to incur. All of these things cumulatively will sum up into a sentence that tells us what's going on. You may need several of these scenarios to better articulate all the things that you might be concerned about. This formula can help you better articulate your scenarios. Here you see, in a fill-in-the-blank kind of way, a place for you to put the who, the threat actor, the what, the control deficiency, the technical asset that's under evaluation, and the type of impact that you have. As an example, on the bottom here, I've put together a scenario that many organizations can probably relate to. Cyber criminals leveraging SQL injection vulnerabilities on their customer portal to cause data disclosure. Even as somebody unfamiliar with the details of cybersecurity operations, they can understand who's doing something, what they're doing, and what the impact is. This is important for communication purposes, but it also allows us to better articulate the data around each of these elements when we start to move into a CRQ quantification. Once you have a fully qualified risk scenario, then we can begin putting data against the elements of that scenario. Let's use that one that I just showed on the previous slide. Cyber criminals leveraging SQL injections on our customer portal to cause data disclosure. Each of those elements will have certain things that need to be quantified. Let's start with the cyber criminal aspect of this. We need to understand how often they might be attacking us. This should be expressed as a range in terms of, are they attacking us every day, every month, every year? And this range should express the most that it can be and the least that it can be. Are they attacking us at least once a week and at most once every 2 years? This range of possibilities is helpful to better understand what the risk is going to be and aids in computation. The other thing we need to articulate better is how capable these attackers are. On a scale of 1 to 100, we can easily estimate different types of attackers in terms of their resources, their time, and the skill sets that they can bring to bear to break into our organization. At the top of that list, we might have nation-state attackers that operate in the 90th or 95th percentile. And on the lower end, we may have some of our own internal employees or general hacktivists across the organization or outside the organization. The next thing we need to understand is the way that this particular weakness that we're evaluating affects the overall control environment for that particular asset. We have to understand how the absence of that control meshes with all the other controls that we know that are already in place. This allows us to estimate twice what the control strength looks like with this control in place and what it looks like without this control in place. This gives us the opportunity to think about the relative amount of control strength that missing control gives us and what the remaining controls are able to do to help thwart this attacker as he tries to break into our organization. Lastly, if they do break into the organization and begin exfiltrating data, what is that loss going to look like to us? Here, it's important to make sure that you talk to people in the organization that know what the business impact of this cybersecurity event look like. If these attackers are successful in exfiltrating data out of our organization, the next part of this scenario is where we need to start estimating next. What does the loss look like if they're successful? In order to do this, we have to talk to people in the organization that knows the right answer to this question. This is typically people from the business who better understand products and services and understand that if this is successful, are we going to lose customers? What are the expenses associated with responding to this? Do we have to do marketing campaigns? Do we have to hire external legal counsel to help us? And then putting numbers against that in terms of estimating ranges of loss. What's the most it can be? What's the least it can be? Building this range of things allows us to input all of these values into a CRQ computation to come up with a quantified value for what this particular loss scenario looks like. Once you've quantified the risk associated with that scenario, the outcome will look like a statistical distribution. Oftentimes, people don't understand what these mean, so it's helpful to be able to cast them in ways that is helpful for them to make a better decision. What this means in practice is picking values off of that distribution of loss. Worst case, best case, most likely. Typically, I'd like to pick the value at the top of that curve, the statistical mode, called the most likely value, and the value at the tail end that represents the worst case, at the 95th or 99th percentile. These two values in concert, most likely and worst case, help drive the right cybersecurity behaviors in an organization. You can break those values down, like you see here, using things like these bubble charts that articulate what types of losses are going to be incurred as a result of that most likely value, how much of that overall value is going to be spent on expenses or fines and judgments. This gives decision makers the opportunity to think about whether or not the amount of loss that's expressed here is appropriate for their organization, or if they need to make changes in order to be able to limit the amount of losses that they might incur. It's also important, too, to think about this in terms of probabilities. Are we talking about a 5% chance that we might lose this, or a 90% chance that we might lose this? Those types of things help encourage business decision makers to think about cybersecurity in a more business-focused way. These loss amounts and these loss distributions are unique and novel the first time that executives see them, but very quickly they're going to want to better understand what this means in terms of priority in the organization. And this is where things like appetite come into play. Understanding whether or not an amount is too much or too little is a subjective measure that can be graphed as you see here. Talking to executives and understanding whether or not a certain amount of loss is appropriate or not gives us ranges of loss that we can plot on a graph like this. Putting an early warning indicator line at the bottom, such as this limit line, helps us know when we're approaching what executives feel is too much loss. And for values that are over that threshold, we can better understand what are the things we need to put in place to bring us back into alignment with organizational appetite. Think back to the types of controls that we're aligning to these different scenarios and understanding that if you fix those things, that loss potential should be reduced. This gives organizations a punch list of things that helps them better fix and align their risk appetite with the environments that they're operating in. That's it for this session. Join me next time as we'll talk about common CRQ pitfalls to avoid. Thank you.